Hello and welcome to a special presentation of In the Money Media brought to you by the Pegasus World Cup Betting Challenge. Fantastic opportunity for contest players coming up this weekend. You can play on site. You can play online at First Bet or Express Bet. Check out the First Bet website for much more information or go directly to pwcbc.com for info. Peter Thomas Fornatale back with you here in the Brooklyn bunker in chilly Brooklyn. Very happy to be joined by a man in warmer climes coming to us from South Florida. He is Randolph, a.k.a. Randy Moss. Randy, how was your trip down there?
It was nice. You're in Brooklyn. I escaped Minneapolis to get to Florida. I've already been to the pool. I've got shorts on. I am embracing the local weather.
You're giving me too much envy. Being warm is a state of mind. I'm getting rid of the grandpa sweater. We're going for shirt sleeves here, just like we're going to do.
There you go.
We'll bring the Clemente vibes to this podcast.
I love it.
Where we're going to be talking about the three races with Pegasus in the name on the day. We're going to have a ton of coverage elsewhere on the In the Money Media Network in terms of all the stakes racing going on. Randy, of course, you'll be on NBC on Saturday. Now, I know you don't have your scheduling expert there with you, so I'm going to commit the broadcasting sin of asking the question I don't know the answer to, not knowing if you'll know it either. Do you know when you're going to be on TV on Saturday?
It's a safe bet that normally I wouldn't know, but this time I just happen to know, Pete. We're on from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be Ahmed Fareed and me and Jerry Bailey and Nick Luck and Matt Bernier and Brittany Erden. So we got a good crew, and really looking forward to it.
We're blowing it out proper. Those are many of my favorite broadcasters. Among them, it's a team of broadcasters that I would say, and I include yourself in this. I'm surprised you're not doing other sports, and racing is very lucky to have you. So it's this is going to be true must-see TV on Saturday. Even if you're playing in the contest, you're on your ADW all day. Tape this stuff and go back and watch it. The team does a wonderful job.
Well, thank you.
Let's dive into some of these races. We're going to start off with the newest of the Pegasus races. This is the Pegasus World Cup Filly and Mare Turf, Grade 2 action, going a mile and a 16th. Fillies and mares 4 and up, and an absolutely loaded field. This is a race over time. I wonder if we could see even more international participation, and we do have some big international participation a little bit later on the card. It's a little tricky over there with how their season works and what stage of training horses are in at this time. But boy, in terms of just a good-looking group and a competitive group, we certainly have that. Where's your eye drawn when you look at this Pegasus World Cup Filly and Mare Turf field, Randy?
Well, I mean, the first thing you do, obviously, anytime you handicap a race is you look at the pace component and see exactly, how that should shape up. And there is plenty of speed in here between Accomplished Girl, although they rated her a little bit off the pace last time. Full Count Felicia occasionally shows speed, but Ruby Nell typically has a lot of speed. Sister Luann set the pace last time in the Suwannee River, so no shortage of speed in here. When you look at numbers, one horse stands out on whatever speed figure you want to look at. Anytime you see a horse that wins by 10 lengths on the turf in a graded stakes race, it's eye-catching. And Star Fortress, Cherie DeVos' horse, came from Europe and won the Cardinal Stakes at Churchill Downs with the buyer speed figure of 104. So you ask yourself, how was the 104 earned? Number one. Number two, were there any mitigating circumstances that may have led to such a high speed figure? And in this case, I think there was. The Churchill Downs turf course was in a state of upheaval last fall. Jockeys were complaining that it was loose. A lot of horses didn't handle it well. On this particular day, November 23rd, they had gotten some rain on top of it. The course was rated as good. All the other races that day scheduled on the turf were taken off the turf. They left this one on because it was a stakes. And what you see with turf courses like that is the same thing you see with dirt tracks that are sloppy. The margins tend to be exaggerated and tend to be a bit misleading. And when margins get exaggerated, speed figures typically get exaggerated. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Star Fortress win, but given all that, I think if she's a favorite, if she's a fairly short price, I think she would be a bet against. On paper, looking at the figs in here, I think it comes down to Didia and Fluffy Socks. Those are the two back and forth. I would give Didia a little bit of an edge, but when you get Fluffy Socks, you get Chad Brown pointing for a particular race, which is always very tough, especially on the grass. So there's a lot to be said for Fluffy Socks as well. Didia's got a bit more tactical speed, I think, although last time she was way back in an aggressively paced Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. I think she'll get the jump on Fluffy Socks. So that's why I would give Didia a slight edge. And what? It's a very good, balanced, very competitive race, I think.
It's fascinating. And Didia, who's a favorite in particular of one of our network regulars, Jessica Paquette. One thing I noticed about her right away is how much better I think that that Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf run is. That it might look to a horse player at first blush, seeing a 10th beaten 4.5. The speed figure, I think, tells a better story. Comes back as a 98. It does. It's very representative of that effort. I also think people might, with all the big names in here, and even seeing the 9 post, I think there's some opportunity she could get overlooked a little bit. So I like that idea of Didia very much. One thing I wanted to just pause on, I don't think the filly is fast enough to win, but I did think it was certainly notable, speaking of international participation, to see Ryan Moore get the mount on Cairo Consort, which I think is, just super smart of him to be getting a ride around there ahead of Warm Heart, who we'll talk about later. On the numbers, though, probably one that's the outside looking in. I would imagine it is horse racing, not jockey racing, after all.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And also the Suwannee River, the prep for this race at Gulfstream. I think those horses are cut below your top contenders in here. But yeah, it is interesting to see Ryan pick up the mount. And he's obviously, lately, when he rides in America, he's been riding in exceptional form.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out in that Filly and Mare Turf. Let's move on to another Pegasus World Cup turf race, the World Cup turf. And this is one where we do have Ryan Moore again on Warm Heart. And I figure this is where the discussion should begin, if not end. What do you make of Warm Heart coming out of not just that huge effort in the Filly and Mare Turf, but also pretty rock solid effort in the Hong Kong Vase, one of the most prestigious turf races in the world?
Yeah, and some people, I've heard some people say that, and man, they're asking this horse to do a whole lot, to run in the Filly and Mare Turf and then to Hong Kong and the Hong Kong Vase, and then come to the United States to run in the Pegasus, even though it's going to be the final race in her career. There's some precedent for this, and this horse is not nearly as traveled as the last horse that Aidan O'Brien brought for the Pegasus Turf, and that was a horse, another mare, a horse named Magic Wand, who was second in this race in back-to-back years. She was actually second to Bricks and Mortar the first time she came to the United States. But you want to talk about an aggressive campaign. Let's look back at Magic Wand. She ran in the Cox Plate in Australia and ran a decent race. She finished fourth. 10 days later, they ran her in the Melbourne Cup at 2 miles, and she didn't run very well in the Melbourne Cup. 4 days later, they ran her in a Group 1 called the McKinnon Stakes. She won that race. And then 5 weeks later, they ship her to Hong Kong, and she gets beat a nose in Hong Kong. And then she comes back in the Pegasus World Cup Turf and runs exceptionally well. Second, she was 2 lengths behind Zulu Alpha. So I think you've got to assume that if Aidan O'Brien thinks the horse is doing well enough to be aggressive and come to the United States, that you can expect her to be in good form. Now, she gets far and away the top figure off the race in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, where she was narrowly beaten by Inspiral. And Inspiral, if you recall, had to have this colossal stretch run to run down Warm Heart at the very end. There was some concern going in that race that the 1.25 miles might be a little too short for Warm Heart, and she might be better in 1.5 miles, okay? So when you're looking at what kind of a fig you can expect from Warm Heart in the Pegasus, keep that in mind. 1.1 miles might be a bit short. Also, in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf, rail first turn, rail second turn, rail third turn. She got a gorgeous trip from Ryan Moore that it's unlikely to be duplicated. But when you look at that 105 figure, okay, you say, okay, all right, maybe a 100. But that's still probably good enough to win in here. So she's got a little bit of wiggle room, and I think Warm Heart is a deserving favorite. But Shook McGahee's got a horse in here that I assume he's going to be pretty well supported at the windows, undefeated in 3 lifetime starts, integration. One of these horses that is more impressive visually than he is on paper, and he's pretty darn impressive on paper. But when you go back and you watch the videos, I encourage anyone who's betting on this race to go back and look at them. It's kind of a wow thing. The horse has a really good turn of foot, can really turn on the afterburners, sort of like a European turf horse. And you can't get a much better trainer for a situation like this than Shug McGahee. I think it comes down to those two. Wouldn't be surprised to see Integration upset Warm Heart if you call that an upset. Again, it's a good race, but I think those two stand out over the others.
Unbeaten and untested is what Integration is. And you make that great point about how the videos look even more impressive than the bare form does. I do worry a little bit just in terms of value about having to bet a horse who has to improve to beat a runner like Warm Heart that's going to be maybe comparable odds, but every reason to improve for this one. I want to see Integration do big things. Yeah, what you mentioned about the travel schedule in the O'Brien barn for Magic Wand, Warm Heart's positively a shirker compared to her and all the work she put in. And then this is just not an uncommon thing for him to do with certain fillies who love their racing. I mean, if you remember, Found 3 races in 5 weeks back in 2015, the ARC Champions Day, and then coming to the Breeders' Cup and just and didn't stop her any. I wouldn't let that be the reason you got off Warm Heart. My fear with Warm Heart would be if she's odds on, which she could be, depending on how they go. I mean, I don't really know how they're going to bet. I think she's about 7-4 now over there in their betting, but I do worry a little bit because I was one of those people saying, "Ooh, is the filly and mare turf going to be too sharp for her?" Clearly, it wasn't, and clearly she can be forward. So the 1.8 probably isn't a problem, but it does put a limit on how short I want to go. I'll ask you about my goofy idea in here, Randy, and this horse has been a goofy idea of mine in the past. That's the 10 runner, Cheryl Spite. This horse, another one. You know, you look down at that running line, you see 8th in the Breeders' Cup Mile, and you think, what's he talking about? This horse is going to win a Grade 1. Well, 8th, but beaten 2.5. Did have a good trip in there, looked in position, and didn't have the class of Master of the Season or Maj or Kaza Creed in the end to quicken up. It's not like Cheryl Spite had a hard luck story in that race. I just think he's fast. He's a Grade 1 winner. He's produced speed figures that would win this race. And I got to think he's going to be a very big price in this spot where so much of the money is going to go the other ways. Am I dreaming, or can you see it with Cheryl Spite?
No, while you were talking a second ago and I raised my fingers like this, it's because I wanted to get in a little bit about Cheryl Spite. So I'm glad you did. This horse, you can make the case on paper, obviously, even though there's no evidence to support it, that, there's one race, but that 1 1/8 might be a bit out of his comfort level. But on the other hand, I mean, this horse is such a fighter. He was second to Modern Games in the Breeders' Cup Mile a couple of years ago. He was just beaten a couple of lengths with a great trip in the Breeders' Cup Mile this year. And last year, right, trainer Roger Atfield had this race circled on his calendar. He really, really wanted to run Cheryl Spite in the Pegasus Turf. And he was overruled by owner Chuck Fipke, who was keen on sending the horse to Japan and running him on dirt. And Roger Atfield did his best to try to talk Chuck Fipke out of that. And if you know Chuck Fipke, if he gets his mind on something, you're not going to talk him out of it. And so the horse wound up going to the February Stakes, and he's still running. From there, he went to Dubai, and then he came back to the United States, and he got deathly sick. He was in quarantine. He was in Chicago. I say deathly sick. He wasn't close to death, but he was very sick. And when they ran him back in the King Edward, his first start at Woodbine, they had the Breeders' Cup in mind. And Atfield told me and Jerry Bailey, this horse is not ready. He's still hasn't completely overcome his sickness. He's short. His next race is even probably going to be short. And when we talked to him before the Breeders' Cup, he said, yeah, even in the Woodbine Mile, he was moving in the right direction. But now he thought he had him where he wanted to be in the Breeders' Cup. It didn't really pan out for him. But for a horse to play underneath in the exotics and maybe take a shot, he didn't do great in the draw. He's got post 10, but he's a hard knocking horse. He really is. And then one more I would slide in there in the supers or whatever. The only other horse I can see would be Masterpiece with Rick Dutrow, right? Rick has a way of moving up these horses, and I know Michael Ivorone has been in contact with Rick, obviously, about this horse, and Rick thinks that the horse is in great shape and is sitting on a big effort. So I think Masterpiece is another one to throw in there in the exotics.
Over under for Saturday. How many buttons on Michael Ivoron's shirt will be unbuttoned in the winner's circle should Masterpiece get there?
And you're assuming he has on a shirt.
We'll have to have special terms and conditions for that part of the bet.
Yeah, I'm going to say you'll have one button, if there's even a button at all on the shirt. It's probably going to be one of these things like down to his navel with chains, and he has a good time. Michael does, and he doesn't give a flip what other people think.
I love that about him.
Oh yeah, he dresses for himself, for his wife. And I think he enjoys the raised eyebrows, actually, that he gets from some of the stuffy old guard in the sport when they see him come out, looking like Elvis without the hair, looking like a fit Elvis. That's what I told him.
That's phenomenal. They'll be having a good time in the suites. There's no denying that as far as Pegasus days goes. Let's go to the race that gives the day its name, Randy, the Pegasus World Cup, grade 1 action to close things out, 1 1/8 on the dirt. Not one of these years where it's a superstar or super duper star or a changing of the guard necessarily, but a deep and competitive field where I, for one, have questions about a lot of these favorites. Who do you think wins it?
I do not have a strong opinion, Pete. I really don't. You can knock literally every horse in this race, and a legitimate knock as well, right? I think on talent, based on their last races, National Treasure surprised the heck out of me in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. I didn't think he was that good. I mean, he won the Preakness. He was gifted the Preakness when he just loped around there. And, after the Preakness, he was disappointing in the Belmont and the Travers and the Awesome Again. There was a lot of speed in against him in the Dirt Mile. I didn't think he could get to the front. And he was hustled hard by Flavien Prat, and not only got to the front, he had a clear lead, and Cody's wish was life and death to run him down. The problem, though, with the knock with National Treasure in here, and why I think as a favorite he's a bet against, is the presence of Hoist the Gold from post position number 4, right? When John Velasquez took the mount on Hoist the Gold 3 races back before the Phoenix Stakes at Keeneland, he went back and he watched all the horses' replays, and he told Dallas Stewart, I think this horse has not been ridden the right way. I think this horse needs to be ridden very forwardly. He needs to be either on the lead or right there, and that's what I'm going to do with him. I'm going to warm him up vigorously before the race, and I'm going to put him right into the mix right away. And the horse has run arguably the 3 best races of his life with Velasquez on it. So not only do you have the likelihood that Velasquez is going to go early with Hoist the Gold, who rode National Treasure to all of his races before the Awesome Again in the Dirt Mile, including the Preakness? John Velasquez. No jockey knows this horse better than John Velasquez, and I think Velasquez knows that National Treasure wants to be on the lead, and that's going to be even added impetus for him to try to beat him to the lead with Hoist the Gold. So what does that tell you? It's probably going to be an extremely lively pace. First Mission will probably get first run. I think he'll probably be sitting 3rd, maybe right behind those 2. Is he that fast? He's got a ton of potential, but I mean, he loses the Clark to Trademark. Trademark is not exactly, your early Breeders' Cup Classic favorite this year. He's not a bad horse, but he's certainly, I think he was 12-1 in the Clark and got He got a good trip, but so there's some questions to ask about First Mission. Is he good enough? The local prep for this race, the Harlan's Holiday, wasn't a particularly strong race. O'Connor got a great trip to beat Grand Aspen. If you just look at the trips the two horses got, you would say, okay, O'Connor wins by a neck. Grand Aspen is the better horse. He covered a lot more ground. O'Connor cut the corner on him and beat him narrowly. But then you look at the weight, and O'Connor was spotting Grand Aspen 5 pounds in there, and that's got to count for something. This is a very confusing race. Skippy Longstocking has good form, but he's got a death post position. I mean, post 12 going 1.1 1/8 at Gulfstream. I mean, that's brutal.
Yeah, the stats aren't pretty. And doesn't he almost have to go from out there and hot up the pace even more than we're expecting, if he's even fast enough to get to those? If he can lay a glove on those top two.
I mean, he was only a length behind National Treasure last time in the dirt mile, so I think you've got a point there. And National Treasure set a pretty quick pace that Zozos couldn't keep up with, and Zozos was the horse everybody thought would probably set the pace in the dirt mile. Honestly, on paper, if you just look at the numbers, right, and you look at the quality of competition, and you look at the way the pace ought to be, the horse to bet is Senor Buscador, right? But then you've got Gulfstream Park, which is speed favoring, which is not conducive to that kind of running style. But then you've got the pace is going to be very hot, which helps him. So you've got point, counterpoint there. But if Senor Buscador, I think he's 20-1 in the program. They totally blew the line on Senor Buscador.
16-1 internationally right now. So they're everybody seems to think, but I think you're right. It's going to come in even from the 16-1 of the international price, isn't it?
Like if he's 8-1, he's a good bet, in my opinion. Anything higher than that, even with the disadvantages of a horse that's a mile back early at Gulfstream Park, he is an honest, hard-trying horse who comes with his A game every time. He won the San Diego last year at Del Mar. It was good enough that day at 1.1 1/8. Now it should help him. Look, at a decent price, I like him better than National Treasure at 3-1.
Yeah, to connect the dots on the National Treasure discussion, the two races where he was able to get that lead, they just stand out like sore thumbs compared to the rest of his PPs, and he's just not going to be able to get it. So, yeah, he's one who I don't have any confidence in. I think from a wagering approach, we have to respect the idea that this is Gulfstream and closing isn't always a thing that gets done. But I think if you're able to take your Senor Buscador money and play him all the way down probably to 4th in supers with other contenders, in addition to your win bet, any other horses that you'd want that we haven't talked about to be in those top 3 spaces for those supers?
See, that's the challenge. It's so murky when you look at the other horses in here, right? If National Treasure gets hooked up with Hoist the Gold, is he good enough to stick around in the supers, or does he just go out the back? I mean,
I think some more closers. Right? Some more closers might make sense. Even a horse like a tough knocker who can finish a little bit, for third, more not so much to win, but just for those underneath spots.
I mean, we could skip through some of these. I mean, Nimitz Class had some big races last year at about this time, but his last race at Parks against much inferior competition at 1-2, he really put in a stinker. He's got new owners that want to try this race, but I can't take him off of that. O'Connor is an improved horse. Last year he ran terrible in this race, but he came out of that race with an entrapped epiglottis and had to have throat surgery. So at least he had an excuse for that. And ever since then, except for the Woodward, when he totally missed the break, he's been a pretty hard knocking horse. If the race completely falls apart, which it might, then I think O'Connor would be a good horse to play in the, to mix into your tries and supers there. Dynamic One, I don't think he's fast enough. And I didn't like his comeback race at Gulfstream. Hoist the Gold, I don't think he wants to go that far. Even if he was the only speed in the race, I'm not sure he would want to go that far. Trademark, he's okay, but is he that reliable? I don't think so. Grand Aspen, if you like O'Connor, you got to like Grand Aspen a little. There's just so many horses to choose from. Il Miracolo has run some good races in the past. I just don't think he's fast enough. It's confusing.
Parents, say hi. This is the great Randy Moss. Parents, ready for Taekwondo. I think that's my cue. That's the producer saying in my ear, send it home. Send it home. It's okay. We'll take an Uber. You'll be on time. You break your boards, no problem. All right.
Okay. Good.
Let me just.
Lily was just wondering if you were going to take.
Yeah, I'm taking you. Don't worry.
If I would have known you were going to wear your Clemente shirt, I would have worn my Stargell shirt. We could have been twins.
Very nice. Very, very nice. Randy, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to do these shows. I look forward to getting to see you in person, and hopefully we'll hit a few of these races and have some fun. Check Randy out on NBC on Saturday. Check out the Pegasus World Cup Betting Challenge website, pwcbc.com. Doesn't roll off the tongue like BCBC, does it? But it's a great event, and you can get all the information there you need. Randy, thanks so much for your time today.
Anytime, Pete. And next time I'll bring Super Jock along again.
That'd be fun too. We'll bring him. We'll bring him back into the mix. He can make fun of us for various reasons. For Randy Moss, I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your photos.